The scratching started just as the sun began to set over the quiet cemetery. 6 feet beneath the fresh soil, a wooden lid was being torn apart by bare fingernails. Eleanor Markham had just woken up to her own death. She realized the heavy oak box was never meant to be opened again. This channel uncovers real stories buried in history, the ones hidden in police files, erased from official records, or too disturbing to fully explain. In the 19th century, the fear of the grave was a global obsession. Medicine was a primitive guessing game played with human lives. Doctors often mistook a deep coma or a weak pulse for the final breath. Without heart monitors or brain scans, the living were frequently dressed in funeral clothes. The Victorian era was terrified of taphephobia, the fear of being buried alive. Medical journals from the 1800s were filled with accounts of people appearing dead for days. Conditions like catalepsy could freeze a person in a death-like state. They remained fully conscious while their families prepared the grave. They were lowered into the cold earth while their hearts were still beating. One of the most chilling cases ever recorded occurred in 1867 with a young girl named Mary Garrett. After a short illness, her body went cold and her pulse seemed to vanish completely. Her grieving family placed her in a stone tomb, sealing the heavy door behind them. The following morning, a cemetery worker passing by the tomb froze in absolute terror. A faint, rhythmic thumping was coming from inside the granite walls. It was followed by a high-pitched scraping sound against the stone. He ran for help, screaming that the dead had returned to life. When authorities forced the tomb open, they found Mary's body slumped on the floor. Her fingertips were raw and bloody from clawing at the exit. The interior of her casket was covered in deep, jagged claw marks. She had escaped the box, but she couldn't escape the tomb before her oxygen ran out. This widespread panic created a profitable industry for inventors. They began filing patents for what became known as safety coffins. These elaborate caskets featured air pipes and glass viewing plates for the guards. A thin silk cord was tied to the hand of the deceased. It was connected to a brass bell standing above the grass. If the corpse moved even a fraction of an inch, the bell would ring. A cemetery night watchman was paid to listen for the sound of the living, but mechanical bells were often useless against the weight of the earth. In 1891, Eleanor Markham was being carried toward her final resting place in New York. As the pallbearers moved the heavy box, they felt a sudden, violent vibration. The men dropped the casket onto the dirt and pried the lid open with a rusted crowbar. Eleanor sat up, her eyes wide with a trauma that no human should ever endure. She looked at the doctor who had signed her death certificate. She whispered that she heard every word of her funeral service from inside the wood. She felt the vibration of each nail being hammered into the lid above her face. Another victim, a young man in France, was exhumed for an insurance check 3 days later. Investigators were horrified to find him still warm and breathing in the dark. He had survived on a tiny pocket of air trapped in the velvet lining. Cases like these proved that the grave wasn't always the end. Eleanor survived, but she spent the rest of her life refusing to sleep in the dark. Historical records suggest that in some cities, nearly 2% of the inhabitants were buried alive. That means dozens were clawing at their lids in total suffocating silence. Modern forensics has occasionally found scratch marks inside coffins during urban relocations. History is a collection of whispers from the shadows. The vault holds the records of those who fought to return from the edge. Some secrets are meant to stay buried in the cold shadows of the earth. Others are waiting for the right moment to be uncovered in the next file of the vault.